The Supreme Court on Thursday threw out 63-year-old restrictions on campaign spending. The court said that companies can spend as much as they like in support of candidates for president and Congress. The court also ruled that companies and unions can't be prohibited from spending money from their own treasuries for campaign ads. I spoke to David Kirkpatrick and I asked him to explain the implications of the ruling.
Well, certainly the conventional wisdom is that Republicans will be the big winners here because the case opens the ability of corporations and unions and other groups to spend money directly to influence elections. And Republicans are closer to business. But the caveats there are that big companies actually don't have that much appetite for getting into messy, combative elections because it alienates other public officials, shareholders, and their customers. So they could do it through trade associations, but the actual political operatives say the big trade associations, Chamber of Commerce, they're not as effective because they don't do they have their own brand name to protect. So they don't necessarily roll out the kind of really mean and negative ad that a kind of ad hoc group like Swiftboat Veterans for Truth or MoveOn.org could come up with. So it's a little bit too soon to tell whether the Republicans are really going to be the big winners here or it could be more evenly divided.
David, does this mean campaign finance reform is just dead?
Well, it's not good for the whole project of campaign finance reform because if you're, the way to look at it is if you could go through an independent group and spend as much as you want without limit to influence an election, why bother going through a party or a candidate where your contributions are severely limited, their fundraising is limited, and there's a lot of disclosure. So in a way, it makes it puts the parties and the candidates at a disadvantage relative to outside special interests.
Now, is there anything that the Congress can do to mitigate this ruling at all?
Well, they're trying. Congressman Van Hollen in the House and Senator Schumer in the Senate are both introducing bills that they've actually been working on for some time. I was told that at one point they had 7 different drafts of potential remedies in the works so that once this decision came down, they could try to get something done ahead of the midterms in the fall that'll reestablish in different ways some of the bans on corporate spending. For example, any company that hires a lobbyist might be restricted from how it could spend money independently to influence an election.
If this ruling stands and Congress is not able to do anything before the midterm elections, how might the midterm elections be different than what we've seen in the last few elections when these laws were in place?
Well, the big difference is going to be more negative advertising. Because if you are an outside group and no candidate has to take responsibility for the ad, then chances are you're going to put your money towards a pretty mean negative ad because that's more effective and, again, nobody has to take responsibility. So it's likely to make things certainly more negative than they were in 2008 when the leaders of both parties kind of said to their supporters, cool it down out there. But even more negative, I would think, than 2004, which was a pretty ugly campaign in some ways.